Imagine this. You're sitting in a meeting room, surrounded by 12 intelligent professionals, engineers, doctors, lawyers, people who've spent decades mastering complex disciplines. Yet as the discussion unfolds, you witness something deeply unsettling. One by one, these brilliant minds begin nodding in unison to an idea that makes no logical sense. Not a single person challenges the obvious flaws. Not one voice breaks the rhythm of collective agreement. You feel your heart rate quicken. The urge to speak rises in your throat, but something stops you, a primal warning that to break this harmony would be dangerous. So you sit in silence, watching intelligence dissolve into conformity, wondering if you're witnessing stupidity or something far more sinister. This is not a rare occurrence. This is the daily reality of human existence, and you've been living inside it your entire life without knowing it. Here's the paradox that should terrify you. We live in the most educated era in human history, yet we are surrounded by what appears to be breathtaking stupidity. People with access to infinite information choose ignorance. Individuals capable of complex reasoning abandon logic the moment they enter a group. Societies that pride themselves on progress repeat the same destructive patterns generation after generation. But what if the problem isn't stupidity at all? What if what you're witnessing is something far more sophisticated, far more insidious, a psychological phenomenon so powerful it can turn geniuses into followers and transform entire civilizations into sleepwalkers? You see it everywhere once you start looking. The friend who suddenly speaks in phrases they've never used before, parroting ideas they've never examined. The colleague who becomes visibly uncomfortable when you question a widely accepted belief, as if your doubt is a personal attack. The family member whose personality seems to shift depending on which group they're with, like a chameleon changing colors to survive. The most chilling realization comes when you recognize it in yourself, those moments when you've spoken words you didn't fully believe, supported ideas you never truly examined, or remained silent when every fiber of your being screamed to speak up. You've felt the invisible pressure, the weight of unspoken rules that govern what can be thought, what can be said, and what must never be questioned. This is not about politics, religion, or ideology. This cuts deeper than any single belief system. This is about the very architecture of human consciousness and how it can be hijacked, manipulated, and redirected without your awareness. The question that should haunt you is this: if your thoughts aren't entirely your own, if your beliefs have been shaped by forces you can't see, and if your very perception of reality has been filtered through mechanisms you don't understand, then who are you? Really? And more urgently, if the majority of people around you are trapped in this same invisible prison, what does that mean for the world you're living in? What happens when mass delusion becomes the foundation of civilization itself? The answers lie deeper than you think, in places your mind has been trained never to look. But here's what I promise you. By the end of this exploration, you'll discover not only how this invisible prison operates, but the exact psychological keys needed to escape it. You'll learn why the most dangerous people in any society aren't the obviously ignorant, they're the intelligent ones who've surrendered their minds to the collective. And, most importantly, you'll understand why your individual awakening isn't just personal liberation, it's an act of rebellion that threatens the very foundations of mass control. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, intelligence, and the reality you've been living in. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you imagine, and once you see what's really happening, you can never unsee it. The first thing you need to understand is why this phenomenon exists at all and the psychological forces that make even the brightest minds vulnerable to it. The prison of the mind doesn't announce itself with bars or walls. It whispers instead, using the very mechanisms that once kept our ancestors alive to now keep us intellectually enslaved. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about the collective unconscious, that vast, inherited reservoir of human experience that shapes how we perceive reality before we're even aware we're perceiving it. You're not just influenced by your culture, you're submerged in it like a fish in water, unable to recognize the medium that sustains and constrains you simultaneously. But Jung saw something even more disturbing: the shadow of collective thought. Just as individuals repress uncomfortable truths about themselves, entire societies develop blind spots, areas of reality they refuse to examine because the truth would shatter their comfortable illusions. And here's the terrifying part. The more intelligent the society, the more sophisticated its mechanisms of self-deception become. Friedrich Nietzsche called it the herd instinct, but he saw deeper than mere conformity. He recognized that most humans don't actually seek truth, they seek the comfort of belonging. They want to feel right more than they want to be right. This ancient survival mechanism, once essential for staying alive in hostile tribes, now serves as the perfect tool for mental manipulation. Your brain still carries that primal terror of exile, whispering that to stand apart is to risk annihilation. But here's what Nietzsche understood that most people never will. In the modern world, this instinct has been weaponized. The tools are no longer spears and physical exile. They're algorithmic conditioning, social ridicule, economic pressure, and the steady drip of repeated ideas that feel like your own thoughts. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. But in an age of mass psychosis, most truths never survive the first stage. They're mocked into silence before they can find their voice, creating what Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, the unconscious act of deceiving yourself to avoid the responsibility of freedom. It's easier to pretend you have no choice than to face the dizzying abyss of actually having one. Aldous Huxley warned us about this in Brave New World. Not a dictatorship of fear, but one of pleasure, where people become so sedated by entertainment, comfort, and distraction that they no longer care about truth. In such a world, ignorance isn't imposed from above. It's chosen willingly, embraced eagerly, defended passionately. The psychological mechanism is elegant in its simplicity. Groupthink. When individuals suppress dissenting views to maintain group harmony, reality itself becomes negotiable. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments prove that even when the truth is obvious, most people will deny their own perceptions rather than contradict the majority. But here's the hidden horror. Your brain isn't wired for truth at all costs. It's wired for survival. And survival once meant blending in. The problem is that in our hyper-connected world, the group is no longer a tribe of 150 people. It's millions of minds networked together, creating pressure to conform that's exponentially greater than anything humans have ever faced. You might think you're immune, but pause for a moment. How many of your beliefs did you actually arrive at through independent reasoning? How much of what feels self-evident to you is simply the residue of repeated exposure? The uncomfortable truth is that most of what you call thinking is actually remembering recycling ideas you've absorbed without ever testing them. This is how civilizations develop collective blind spots so massive that future generations will marvel at our inability to see what was right in front of us. But the consequences of this blindness run deeper than you realize. Mass psychosis doesn't announce itself with banners or sirens. It seeps in quietly, like water through the hull of a ship. And by the time you feel the cold rush against your ankles, it's already too late. At first, the consequences seem almost trivial. You notice conversations becoming shallower, not in words, but in weight. People stop asking why and settle for what. The news transforms into a theater of manufactured outrage. Every headline designed not to inform, but to provoke. The more polarized the narrative, the easier it becomes to choose a side, and the less mental energy it takes to think. Your relationships begin to change in ways you can't quite articulate. Not because you've grown apart, but because there's less and less room for independent thought. You find yourself biting your tongue not out of politeness, but out of self-preservation. You avoid certain topics. You let obvious lies pass unchallenged. You smile when you want to scream. This is how the mind learns to kneel. On a neurological level, something devastating happens when you suppress your own critical thinking for too long. You start to lose it. The neural pathways of skepticism weaken like unused muscles. Your threshold for questioning drops. Eventually, you no longer can think against the grain, not because someone forbids it, but because the cognitive muscle has atrophied. The brain's confirmation bias kicks into overdrive, ensuring you seek only information that supports pre-existing views. Authority bias makes you trust statements simply because someone with status said them. The bandwagon effect tricks you into believing the majority must be right. These aren't flaws of intelligence, they're features of a survival-oriented brain. But in the wrong environment, they become fatal weaknesses. On a societal scale, the consequences become catastrophic. When enough people abdicate their responsibility to think, culture itself becomes an echo chamber. Policies get made based on popularity, not wisdom. Complex issues get reduced to bumper sticker slogans. People who are individually intelligent become collectively stupid when acting as a crowd. History overflows with such moments. Witch hunts in medieval Europe, where entire communities convinced themselves that human evil could be burned away in the screams of the accused. The rise of totalitarian regimes, where neighbors turned on neighbors not because they hated them, but because they feared being the lone dissenter. Financial bubbles where rational investors ignored obvious danger because everyone else was still buying. It's always the same pattern. The crowd convinces itself it's sane, and in doing so, becomes blind to its own madness. Psychology calls this pluralistic ignorance, the phenomenon where individuals privately reject a belief but assume everyone else accepts it, so they go along. Picture a theater filling with smoke. Each person sees it, feels unease, but looks around and sees no one else reacting, so they remain seated. The smoke thickens, the air grows toxic, and still no one moves. This isn't just a metaphor. This is the psychological atmosphere we breathe every day. Perhaps the most insidious consequence of all occurs when a culture reaches a critical mass of collective delusion. It will attack any attempt to wake it up. Try telling a sleepwalker they're dreaming and they'll become angry. Try telling a crowd caught in mass psychosis that they're wrong, and they'll see you as the threat. This is why genuine change is so rare. It's not enough to have the truth, you must be willing to endure exile for it. But here's the dangerous paradox. If you choose to remain silent, you become complicit in the madness. If you speak, you risk being cast out. And so the ultimate question emerges. Are you willing to be the lone voice of reason in a room that has forgotten reason exists? Because if you're not, the room will decide for you. And when it does, you may not even notice the walls have closed in until there's no way out. But there is a way out. And it begins with understanding that rebellion doesn't start in the streets. It starts in the silent chambers of your mind. Rebellion begins with one dangerous sentence echoing in the darkness of your consciousness. What if they're all wrong? That simple question is the spark, small, inconvenient, often terrifying. Because the moment you entertain it seriously, you feel the ground beneath your feet shift. Suddenly, the comfort of the crowd turns cold. You realize that what you mistook for safety was actually sedation. Breaking free from mass psychosis isn't about shouting louder than the crowd. The crowd thrives on volume, feeds on attention, grows stronger with every voice that tries to match its noise. The true act of rebellion is far more subversive. You withdraw from its frequency altogether. First, you must reclaim your attention, the front line of your freedom. In an age where algorithms dictate reality, every headline, every viral post, every trending outrage is engineered bait designed to keep you reactive, not reflective. You must starve this machine of your mind's energy. Limit your exposure to echo chambers. Step away from the drip feed of manufactured consensus. Learn to be comfortable with not knowing the latest outrage of the hour. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The first step out of mass psychosis is dragging these inherited beliefs into the light. Write down your core beliefs. Trace their origins like a detective. Ask yourself, who benefits if I believe this? Who loses if I stop? When did I first accept this as truth, and did I ever actually test it? Most people discover they've been living with borrowed thoughts their entire lives. Second, you must reclaim your language. George Orwell understood that corrupted language leads to corrupted thought. When crowds repeat slogans, they're not merely speaking, they're programming themselves with each repetition. Refuse to use words designed to limit your thinking. Speak in precise terms, even if it makes you slower to respond. The crowd hates slowness because it lives on reflex and emotional reaction. You must relearn the lost art of deliberation. Replace vague tribal signaling with specific, measured language that forces you to think before you speak. Third, you must find the others, but not in the way you think. True rebellion in solitude is noble, but rebellion in community is sustainable. This doesn't mean forming another echo chamber or creating a counter-tribe. It means surrounding yourself with people who value truth more than comfort, who challenge you as much as they support you. People whose loyalty isn't to you personally, but to the reality you're all trying to uncover together. But here's the paradox that most people can't handle. To find such people, you must first be willing to stand completely alone. You must endure the wilderness period, the exile from the normal world. Nietzsche's Übermensch is forged in this loneliness, shaped by the brutal honesty of self-reliance. Only when you no longer fear exile can you recognize others who've been cast out for the same reason, their refusal to surrender their minds. Fourth, reclaim your silence. The crowd is addicted to noise because silence is where independent thinking begins. Most people can't stand alone with their thoughts for more than minutes without reaching for distraction. But silence isn't emptiness. It's the forge where clarity gets hammered into shape. Practice being still. Walk without podcasts. Sit without screens. Let your mind wander into territories the crowd has never shown you. In that silence, you'll start hearing the voice that was always there beneath the noise, your own. Finally, you must reclaim your courage. Every act of rebellion, no matter how small, requires the willingness to be disliked, misunderstood, even hated. This is the price, and there's no way around it. The crowd will test you. It will call you arrogant, paranoid, dangerous. It will use guilt to pull you back, reminding you of the warmth you left behind. But that warmth was the heat of the herd, not the fire of your own mind. The moment you break free, something counterintuitive happens. The world doesn't suddenly become clearer. It becomes messier. The easy answers dissolve. Moral lines blur. You're left with complexity, uncertainty, and the constant demand to think for yourself. Many people can't bear this responsibility and return to the comfort of the crowd. But if you can stay, if you can resist that gravitational pull, something profound shifts. You begin to see patterns the crowd cannot see. You start recognizing the mechanisms of manipulation, the psychology of mass obedience, the very architecture of collective delusion. You see the strings being pulled. More importantly, you see who's pulling them. And once you see, you cannot unsee. This is the beginning of true sovereignty, not the kind granted by governments or movements, but the kind that exists entirely within your mind, the kind no one can take unless you willingly surrender it. But here comes the moment that shatters everything you thought you understood about this journey, the realization that will either liberate you completely or send you running back to the comfort of collective delusion. The crowd was never your greatest enemy. It was only a mirror, reflecting the parts of you that wanted to belong more than you wanted to be free. For all the talk of manipulation, propaganda, and mass psychosis, the final truth is far more intimate and infinitely more uncomfortable. The chains weren't forged entirely by society, by algorithms, or by shadowy puppet masters. They were also forged by your own hands, link by link, every single time you chose comfort over clarity, safety over truth, belonging over authenticity. This is where real liberation begins, not in the illusion of us versus them, but in the terrifying recognition that the enemy and the victim were both living inside your own mind. You see that the crowd's madness is a projection of the madness you once carried within yourself. The lies you fought so hard against were the same lies you once repeated without question. The conformity you despise in others was the same conformity you once embraced for the sweet relief it provided. Carl Jung called this process individuation, integrating the shadow, becoming whole by embracing both the light and darkness within. Until you confront the parts of yourself that crave the warmth of conformity, you will always be at risk of returning to it. The crowd will find its way back into your heart unless you face the reason you once loved it. This is the paradox of awakening. The more conscious you become, the more compassion you feel for those still asleep. You no longer look at them as fools or enemies, but as mirrors of your former self. You remember the fear, the desperate longing, the profound relief that came from surrendering responsibility to someone else. And you realize that in their eyes, you are now the madman. The greatest danger after awakening isn't the crowd's judgment, it's your own bitterness. It's devastatingly easy to hate the masses for their blindness, to resent them for rejecting you. But bitterness is just another prison, one that keeps you chained to the very thing you escaped. It transforms liberation into its own form of delusion. True freedom isn't measured by how far you've run from the herd, but by how little power its noise still has over your mind. When you can stand in the middle of mass hysteria and feel nothing but quiet clarity, you've found something more valuable than gold: inner sovereignty. Here lies the deepest truth that will redefine everything. The opposite of mass psychosis isn't isolation or superiority. It's sovereignty, the ability to think, feel, and act from a place completely untouched by manipulation, whether you stand alone or among millions. You realize that your role was never to save everyone. You cannot drag someone out of a dream they're determined to keep dreaming. Trying to wake the unwilling is like trying to teach physics to someone who insists the earth is flat. The harder you push, the deeper they dig into their delusion. Your role is simpler and more profound. Remain awake yourself. Live in such a way that your clarity becomes a quiet, unshakable beacon for those who are ready to see. Not preaching, not arguing, not trying to convince, just being awake in a world that has chosen to sleep. This is where the fear finally begins to dissolve. You stop looking over your shoulder for the crowd's approval. You stop needing your thoughts validated by numbers. You stop contorting yourself to fit a world that no longer fits you. And in that space, in that profound silence, something miraculous happens. You begin to hear your own voice again. Not the voice of rebellion, not the voice of reaction, but the voice that was there before all the noise began. The voice that isn't for or against the crowd, but simply, purely yours. It speaks in truths that don't depend on consensus. It whispers insights that will never trend on social media. It tells you that your worth was never measured by agreement, and that your freedom was never something given to you by others. It was always yours to claim. You begin to live differently. You read not to confirm, but to discover. You speak not to win, but to illuminate. You listen not to react, but to understand. And slowly, imperceptibly, the world around you changes, not because you've changed it directly, but because you've removed yourself from its madness without abandoning your humanity. The final, most powerful realization is this: you cannot control the collective mind, but you can choose not to be part of it. Mass psychosis will come and go like weather patterns. The faces will change, the slogans will evolve, the technology will advance, but the fundamental human tendency to surrender individual thought for the comfort of belonging will remain constant throughout history. Your task isn't to eradicate this tendency from the world, an impossible mission that would only trap you in a new form of delusion. Your task is to uproot it from yourself every single day, with the same dedication a gardener tends their plot. And when you do this consistently, you discover that freedom isn't the absence of influence, it's the mastery of it. You will still live among others, still hear their voices, still feel the gravitational pull of their collective tides, but you will stand rooted in the one place they cannot touch, the quiet, inviolable clarity of your own awakened mind. This is the truth the crowd will never tell you, because it cannot. The crowd only exists when you believe you need it. The moment you don't, the moment you realize you are complete within yourself, it dissolves into mere background noise in your life, and you walk forward without asking anyone's permission. So you leave the marketplace of borrowed thoughts and manufactured consent. The hum of unthinking agreement fades behind you like a distant radio station losing signal. The road ahead is quieter, lonelier, and far less certain than the path you left behind. But it is yours, completely, irrevocably yours. And in the profound stillness that follows, you finally understand the truth that was always waiting for you to discover. You were never meant to be one of them. You were meant to be awake. You were meant to be free. The question is, will you choose to remain so?